and they own about 150 bulk carriers and manage 87 ships from Lübeck. And they commercially operate about 650 ships from commercial offices worldwide. So no doubt Mark is a very busy person, and we thank him for his time here today. Today, the topic will be ship management and future developments. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to Mark.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'm really pleased to be able to come and do a presentation to the Northwest Branch. I started with a conversation with Ian Matheson some time ago, and the option to do something to the Northwest Branch because of my shipping past was such a great opportunity. I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you all and meet you all. I recognise a few people, so it's really nice to see you again. And I just wanted to go over a few things about ship management. And as we were discussing this, or as I was discussing this with Ian Matheson, this was post-COVID when we were doing a lot of work then when we first started to discuss doing this presentation. And we thought there's the recent challenges, particularly from post-COVID times, and the other things, the big issues that we see in ship management at the moment. So this is just a bit of an overview, and I look forward to having an interesting discussion with you and get some other input from your viewpoint. So can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so just looking at a few different things of it all, I think I try to think of the shipping industry is quite complex, so I try to compartmentalize the different issues that impact us. One of the big ones, of course, is always the commercial aspect. And I think over recent years, we've seen an increase in the change in how ownership models for shipping has happened. And that's come along with some changes in the management models that go with it. We've seen an increase in sectoralization and consolidation of fleets. Particularly noticeable was the container fleets, where now there's 3 major liners that operate the vast majority of the entire sector. And that has also now started to pass off into dry bulk and also some other sectors as well. The ownership models, we've seen a lot more investor money in the business rather than the traditional ship owning model. And with that has brought some other aspects that we'll probably talk about a little later on in how those owners now handle the ship management aspects of the business. So next click, please. Yeah, some of the technological aspects. I mean, we've been talking about these for a long time and we continue to talk about them. And there's some action being made in some areas, but it's still mostly discussions and a lot of complexity, a lot of change and a lot of new challenges. The key one, I think, at the moment that we're hearing a lot about is new fuels. Everybody is desperately now trying to work on new fuels. IMO has made eventually some progress on what their greenhouse gas ambitions are likely to be and how it's going to work. There's some huge challenges there for us, which we'll go into a little bit later on. Digitalisation and autonomy has been a big issue, and it comes up every now and then, but it seems to have lost a little bit in the conversations while we're all thinking and talking about new fuels. But there's great opportunities, in my view, in digitalisation and autonomy, and we've seen some ship managers use it to great effect in some areas. And of course, with all that goes the global fleet. We have a global fleet. Ships normally last 20 years or more, even though the sort of average age has been falling over the last 20 years or so. I was just checking some figures. I think the global fleet is about 60,000 ships now of over 500 GT. And the average age is a little bit less than 20, which the fleet is getting younger. But for big ships, in the major sort of trades, the average age is quite young. The growth area that we're expecting to see in the global fleet is going to be in gas, LNG, and bigger ships generally, I think. Next one, please. Yeah. With all that, particularly from my aspect doing QHSE, I always look at things in terms of both compliance and performance. So compliance is the regulatory element and performance is the standards, whether those standards are national, local, international, industry, sectoral, customer, whatever. So we look at the compliance phase, the regulations, and in my view, I would say that the complexity and speed of change of the industry and the way that we operate, it's almost impossible for the global regulations like IMO to keep up to pace with what we need in the industry. I think we've got a huge challenge with STCW. I know there's quite a lot of people involved in the Northwest Branch in the education side. To make STCW fit for purpose for the modern shipping industry is an extremely difficult and probably impossible challenge. So we deal with that in many ways through sectoral standards, industry standards, and industry best practices. I'm a fan of the ISM code, and I think the ISM code can be used quite effectively to identify and then implement those standards and provide a framework around which we can use them. Next one, please. With all that, of course, with all these different aspects comes crew training and competence. There sometimes in ship management, and particularly you get to more senior levels, you hardly ever hear people, you hear people talk less about the crew and more about money, ownerships, deals, trades, etc. I think it's really important that at all levels of management in ship management activities, we always remember that it's the crew that makes the difference. It's the crew that's on board that deliver the product, deliver the service, and make the money ultimately. We all talk about how the clever things that we do, but ultimately it's down to the crews. If the crews are operating the ships well, everything else that goes on is less relevant and doesn't matter. During COVID, we lost a huge amount of input and impact, influence with how we work with crews, how we deal with them, how we react, how we get the best out of them, how we drive the business forward. And I think another issue that we've got throughout all this is that we're now seeing in all sectors a lot more stakeholder input. They express their expectations much more clearly. And after many, many different types of standard systems, ideas, options, we're now starting to see something around ESG generally, which most people have a clearer understanding of. I think we saw this sort of stakeholder impact quite strongly 20 years ago in the tanker sector, but now you're seeing it in all other sectors as well, containers and dry bulk as well now. Next one, please. So just looking at those in a little bit more detail, if we look at the sort of the people challenges, COVID had a huge impact on recruitment and retention. It increased the disconnect between the owner and the manager and the crews. It was tremendously problematic in so many different ways. And it was interesting to see the ways that different owners adapted and dealt with all these different challenges. I think a lot of ship managers and now most people I speak to are really focused on repairing those relationships with the crews and that contact that they lost over all these times. But as you know, when you've had 2 years of doing things in a certain way and it seems to work, or to an extent people believe it works, it's difficult sometimes to build up the momentum to go back to the good practices and the good ways of working that you had before. And people think, well, we did it like that and it was okay for 2 years. As a personal experience, Oldendorff had quite a big series of ships delivering new in China during COVID. And it's impossible to get crews on board. So we started a new Chinese crewing agency that we had no relationship with, that sailed brand new ships out of China, hugely expensive as well, because it was a very closed market, and of quite poor quality. And then we had to deal with that. And then we had to put things right. And then ultimately do a change process to put the crewing back to where it should have been and what our expectations were. Really quite complex and very difficult. During COVID time, there's restrictions on crew leaves. Everybody knows the stories about people that were being, relief was being delayed. This had a big impact on both recruitment and retention. I think everybody's retention figures really suffered, some more than others. Owners that had very good crew welfare policies and looked after the crew very well suffered hugely financially because of the restrictions that were being put up in different ports. But that's going back to a little bit now. But there's now a counter, not proposal, there's now a counter movement where crew welfare seems to have gone up the agenda quite considerably. And there's a lot more talk about crew welfare. And the other stakeholders are now starting to move on crew welfare. Perhaps there's an opportunity now to do some more work on crew welfare and make changes. During the times of COVID, a lot of people talked about it, but there was not that much that anybody could do. We were all really quite tied in the limitations that were changing all the time and that were really outside our control. The other big impact that is being felt is the Russian-Ukrainian war. Ukraine supplies a huge amount of crew, Russia a little less so, but there's a number of quite big companies in some sectors that had very large proportions of their ships manned by Russians and Ukrainians. When these companies effectively lost their manning strategy, or their manning strategy was significantly impacted, they had to go into the market and start stealing other people's crews. And this caused absolute chaos everywhere and further impacted the recruitment and the retention problems that everybody was facing. So it had the first impact on capacity and then the second impact on recruitment and retention. And that has the impact in the quality and the output at the end. With that has brought a number of changes in manning strategies. Some of you will know in detail some of the pressures that or stakeholder interests in the way that charterers or oil majors or whatever like owners to have a manning strategy of certain crew types or limited numbers of nationalities. But during COVID, those companies that had more mixed nationalities did better during COVID times because of the COVID restrictions changed from one country to another, Philippines, India, Indonesia, wherever, then you could use the other sources. So those managed strategies from companies that used to use only 1, 2 or 3 different nationalities, a lot more of them are using more mixed nationalities now. Whether that's good or bad, this is where we're at now. And if we go back, that'll be another question. But this is then changes other aspects of how you monitor that quality, how you control it, how you get a good impact and good assessment. Next one, please. Yeah, people, further issues on the people. The skill sets for the new technology. We're still seeing quite a rapid change in the technology that we have on board. Even simple ships, simple bulk carriers, there's a lot of new technology. And this is then affected by the sort of training capacity that we've got. The market booms, the market falls, quality increases, quality reduces, but it's a continual fight all the time to maintain any sort of oversight or control of training quality. During COVID, this was made even harder because it was impossible to go and assess the sort of training establishments, see the people in the training colleges and do the normal sort of audit processes. So again, we're playing catch up there now. A lot of work, a lot of additional activity to try to get back to where we were before. I mean, we're 2 years on now and we're still not, I don't think we've got there and there's still a lot more work to do. The crew welfare initiatives, I think this is really important. My own recent experiences with some of the big Australian shippers who are now pushing this as part of their sort of ESG, their corporate agenda from the very top in the organisation. So there's the SSI, Sustainable Shipping Initiative, is an organisation of ship owners and other stakeholders, including cargo interests, that produced a crew welfare self-assessment document, of which now major shippers are expecting owners to commit to it, and then to go through like a TMSA or a dry BMS type process there where you can be audited against those standards. So I think this is a sort of a welcome change, and it's quite direct and it's quite specific. If it follows the same path as oil major vetting and oil major work, then we've got quite a good chance of having some real impact. So that's a positive one, I would say. And the last point there is about new crew sources and new crew strategies. The global labour supply market is global, but everywhere everywhere you go, everywhere you speak to, everybody you talk to about anything, it's not just in the UK where we're just short of people to work behind bars and restaurants and factories and shops and bus drivers. It's a global issue. It's hard to find staff to work in repair yards, dry docks, technicians to come and fix your radar. There's a global shortage of people to do work everywhere. And that includes crew, of course. There's always the same saying, though, there's never a real shortage. It's just a shortage of the people, jobs at the right pay. So this puts pressure on the crew cost side as the only way to react to it. So different companies have got different strategies to that, but it's a global market, and it's another one of the many challenges that we face. The next one, please. Training, yeah, a lot of new technology, a lot of new regulations and a lot of new standards. With retention, which was severely impacted by COVID, this causes additional challenges on the training. That we're repeating training, we're having to do it again, or we're trying to do it in different ways, or we completed training over the last 3 or 4 years, and now we look at it and think it didn't have the impact we wanted to, it didn't have the effect we wanted to, because it was harder for us to assess the quality of the training as delivered. We thought we'd completed a set of training, we thought we'd got to certain levels of competencies, and then a year later you find out that it didn't really have the impact that you wanted or you expected from it. so it needs to be repeated. With new technology and the new regulations that will come in, particularly around new fuels, we've got a huge challenge there. Just some sort of data, there's a massive, I think 81% of new building order books in Korea are dual fuel LNG engines. There's a massive amount of IGF training required. And the quality is a big question mark for everybody, the effectiveness, and then the effective implementation of that when we get on board ships is going to be another big question. At Oldendorf, we've got some very clever engineers and naval architects who are talking a lot about all sorts of new technologies. But when those of us from the ship management side speak to them about crewing or safety or risk assessments, they're really not interested. They don't understand what we're talking about, and it's not their role. They're doing some really clever stuff with some very clever technical aspects, and then we're not connecting. We're having a real struggle to connect and keep this thing moving on. Looking at that in terms of STCW, STCW it was from start to finish. I understand it would take STCW about 7 years to do a major change. So STCW basically can't keep up with the needs the industry and technology will produce, and even if it wanted to. So is STCW fit for purpose is a big question. It can't keep up. It just provides a very minimum baseline. There are so many now externally driven standards and sectoral needs. From a ship management point of view, STCW is very much a minimum, and we work there most of our time on the external standards that are coming from all over and different sectors. Next one, please. Yeah, technology. So LNG is a huge issue on all sorts of ship types coming now. The new build order book, approximately 80% of engines are dual fuel. We've got new fuels like ammonia and hydrogen. When I was working with chemical tankers, I used to ask the guys on board saying, what's your favourite and what's your least favourite cargoes? And ammonia was always one of the ones that they hated carrying. The guys on chemical tankers prefer carrying methanol to ammonia. In the preamble, we talked a little bit about batteries and battery fires. I know there's some expertise in this meeting today. Another big issue, lots of other fire risks related to it. And then other new sort of quite quirky technologies that are being developed using wind power. So there's some interesting projects on that. I'm over in Germany at the moment, and we've got Flettner rotors. So Flettner was a North German guy that invented these rotors in the 1920s, and now they're being used quite successfully by ferries on the Baltic. So there's some more work being done on that. Talking to somebody in a training establishment, and the figures that they gave me was that IGF code training capacity, there's about 300,000 people to be trained, and so that's possibly a modest estimate, and that training capacity will need to be over the next few years. So we'll look at that and start to worry about standards, quality, overview, how do we implement it, how's it all going to work. It's not just the compliance elements of it all, it's the competence elements. How do we know it's going to change? In the tanker business and in the higher levels of ISN, we talk about systems like good risk assessments, good risk mitigations, management of change for significant change, for important safety changes. Management of change is not done well across most of the industry. It's done well in the tanker sector and in some of the more sophisticated companies. But once we start to get to LNG as a fuel, or some of these new fuels with more significant safety risks, the whole concept of management of change is going to have to be much more forcibly implemented and controlled. Lots of other issues around that cause lots of sleepless nights, perhaps, for some people. But yeah, this is a big challenge for us all. There's other devices and technology that, while we try to achieve our greenhouse gas emission targets, including shaft power limitation. For those of us of certain ages, we remember the different generations of ships that were built under different market conditions. And I remember sailing on ships that were very low powered because they were built when oil prices were high. And every time it got the wind and the weather got to a certain stage, the ship starts to go backwards. So now we're building this in by regulations. That we've got this chapeau type idea that we can override it. But I think a lot of people are feeling quite uncomfortable and nervous about that as well. So a lot of safety implications that we're looking at with the technological changes that are being implemented and driven. Next one, please. Autonomy and automation, that should say. It should say automation and autonomy. So we see a lot of good academic work on automation and the autonomous shipping. Personally, my view is that we'll see a lot more autonomy, we'll see a lot more automation, we'll see a lot more digitalisation, but I don't see a commercial case on the majority of ships for autonomous shipping. Ships' crews are very effective, they're very efficient, they're very cost effective, and they provide a lot more than just the sort of base activities that you do. The change in the commercial aspects, I don't see there's a safety case for it in the majority of major world trading, and I don't think there will be for us for some time. The little picture there, that's Carnival's headquarters. So Carnival Corp, after their incidents with the Costa Concordia, they set up centres in Miami, Genoa, I think, and I think might one in Singapore or East. And I believe that CMA have done something similar, and I know that other shipping companies are planning some similar sort of activities. Basically, they download positions of the ships into a command centre like this. They can get a lot of data from the VDR, and you can monitor and see what the ships are up to 24/7. So you have little control centres, which will be manned by captains and chief engineers on a continual basis, and they can see what's happening and have an overview. This changes a lot more than just straightforward spying the cab, seeing what's happening on board ships. But it does have potential great benefits in fuel saving and safety. So out of that, we get performance. I think that there'll be other issues arising out of it all, but we'll see how that sort of develops. But I think this is more likely what we'll see in more offices and more organisations. Oldendorf are using quite a lot more technology for main engine monitoring now, which has been really, it's been a game changer for some of the technical managers and the superintendents. Will digitalisation reduce or increase workloads? Well, the workloads increase very rapidly all the time. And digitalisation should help us to manage that workload. It should help us to manage to organise what data we're getting, what data we use, and how we then analyse and take that data forward. The output from that data that we're getting. I think the benefits of remote monitoring is really huge. Again, COVID drove this on. I think the shipping industry is quite conservative, and we might not have seen the progress that has been made if it wasn't for something like COVID as a disruptor to make everything, change the world in this aspect. Remote surveys, remote inspections, auditing, insurance and vetting. Personally, I think it's weaker, not as effective as an in-person one, but the technologies that were tried and used are effective, and they will continue to have benefits going forward. Next one, please. Yeah, the commercial environment. It's a photograph of Singapore, for those that recognise it. Singapore, a huge maritime centre there now. The centre of gravity, we've been talking about this for 20 years, is moving to the east. The biggest share of the new build order book is for Asian owners. Dual fuel orders, 50%, about 50%, I think it said, are in, about 81% of new build orders include dual fuel engines, and almost 50% of dual fuel LNG orders are in South Korea. Fleet renewal on that respect is, fleet renewal capacity is expected to be about 3% of the world fleet per year. So it's not going to be possible to meet the CII ratings within the existing fleet. The GHG targets that the shipping industry is expected to meet will have to be met largely by existing ships, and that will be a huge challenge. Next one, please. Yeah, the commercial environment. Yeah, old-fashioned ship management. It's quite a basic sort of task. You manage the crew, you manage the asset, and you manage the money. So that's where we've been for a long time. We've lost some of the ability to manage the crews due to COVID, which we're trying to get back now. Managing the physical asset is a much more complex task. It's not what it used to be. Superintendents used to be great engineers and on knowledge of naval architecture if you're in that sort of sector. Now they're logistics experts. Their knowledge is the more generalists, and they use expert stuff all the time. They're much better on budgets than used to be, I would say. Managing the money. Budgets are a hugely important aspect of ship management, and all you hear all the time is budget, budget, budget. But changing in ship management activities, yeah, I would say there's a lot more monitoring and managing, just monitoring all the time, checking. And that checking is on a much shorter sort of time cycle. It used to be that reports would come in and then you reply to them and you're backwards and forwards with a few messages. Monitoring is now often in real time on a lot of data that's coming in. The logistics element of it all is extremely complex. And the compliance and performance goes through every aspect of the organisation. So it's quite some depth now. And as people understand the sort of third party and stakeholder inputs and requirements. Next one. Yeah, in the commercial environment, the external sort of inputs are very powerful. So I don't think everybody's aware of what's been going on in the oil industry for the last 20 years, but we're seeing more of it in the container sector from the large carriers. I used to deal regularly with Maersk and CMA CGM, and they would say when they're doing a big contract with a large shipper, Walmart or H&M or whatever, or Volvo, they would say they're expected to give certain quality guarantees throughout their supply chain. And in the container business, it's not that Maersk would operate in their supply chain about 30% of their own ships and about 30% long-term TC tonnage, and then the rest is on the spot market. And then from that, there's slot sharing. So Maersk containers could go on a massively wide range of different container ships. And the cargo interest was trying to say, how do you give me guarantees of the quality that of the carriage of my goods? And it's very difficult for them. This is coming through in the dry bulk even stronger now. RightShip have been there doing vetting for a while to a certain level. Personally, I think that RightShip's are sort of a less sophisticated and simpler version of vetting than Occam-Sire. Occam-Sire is very sophisticated, very challenging, but certainly delivers very good results. RightShip it delivers results and it helps and it gives an overview and supports the principles, but it's not as sophisticated or not as effective as the Sire version. So we are seeing it across in other sectors as well now, and I think we'll see a lot more of that. I don't think that's going to end. And with ESG, as larger organisations go deeper into ESG, that will be reflected in stakeholder and supply chain pressures. The other two sort of examples I've put up there is Poseidon Principles, which is a lot of financial targets being set, and SSI, the Sustainable Shipping Initiative. When the customers are expressing all these different needs and expectations, they're referring to their own commitments, whether that's through their own ESG policies or Poseidon Principles. And sometimes we get big questionnaires if we're going into contracts, and they'll refer to some basic ISO standards. So all these different levels of performance, not compliance, are there all the time, and they're continually being pushed. And they're not going away. They'll only get more complex. And the last one I put there was the crew welfare one. So I'm pleased to see that some of these external customer needs and pressures is now referring to crew welfare as well. Next one, please. Yeah. Recently, I've been hearing and seeing a lot more regarding the arrangements between owners and managers. The traditional model of a traditional ship owner is still there, and some of them are extremely successful and professional. But when I go to meetings or dinners or events, I seem to hear a lot more about different investor money in the shipping business, and they have quite specific financial objectives. They need cost certainty, so this is why you get the huge drive on budgets and being able to be very certain about what the budget expectations for their OPEX are. They need capacity and flexibility. They need to be able to change stuff in and out quite quickly. And to do that, you need scale. So this supports then the drive for mergers, for consolidation in the marketplace. So I was following the mail, the shipping press. I see that TOM and OSN are likely to join. We've seen the rapid rise of Synergy to about 1,000 ships now. Oldendorff use Synergy for some third-party management, and they are hugely ambitious to get to more and more and more ships. And now that if these large ship managers are using acquisitions, then maybe we'll see some pretty aggressive and consolidation within the ship management world. Ship managers work in a different world to the traditional ship manager, or the owner's ship manager, or the managers of an owner's fleet. They have different challenges, but they also have different options. If Synergy are managing 1,000 ships, they'll have an enormous crew labour force that they can use quite effectively and quite efficiently. And it delivers all sorts of other things. There are some specialists in the ship management world that specialise in certain sectors and trades, but the financial aspects to it all are quite, I think the pressures have been seen, and you can see it in the outcomes as the business develops. Okay, next one, please. I think we get towards the end now. Yeah, summary. Yeah, so change is a constant. We often laugh to say that when we were going through a change process, you'd start a change team, you'd put it all together, you'd start as a little project. Now in organisations, I think there's a clear understanding that change is a constant, and now the business is constructed and your departmental structures and your organisational workflows are put together in a way so that you can scale up and scale out or flex into changes as they develop for you. These changes are increasingly complex. They have a lot more unexpected elements to them. So we have all across the business, from owners and managers and all the other stakeholders and people involved in the adventure, start to adopt different arrangements and relationships and techniques to help to manage that complexity, to be more flexible and to deal with the rapid change. And the regulatory input is always there. It's quite complex, but the stakeholder input is the one that I see as being the biggest growth over the last few years, and certainly post-COVID. So I think that's about it. It's a little bit quicker than expected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was a really interesting and fascinating talk on the on the sort of modern ship manager. Yeah, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know whether there are any questions, Chris, in the chat function. I have a question.
I lost my mute button. No, there's no questions in the chat box at all at the moment.
Good. I have one question actually. You mentioned there just in your summary the sort of regulatory input is disconnecting from the stakeholder input, and I think certainly in the tanker sector there's always been this discussion as to whether or not ISM drove standards up in tanker in the tanker sector as opposed to the sort of commercial drive to bring up standards. And as you pointed out, you're sort of seeing more of this now and in other sectors. So do you think ultimately that it will be the commercial side of things that will drive and improve standards?
Yeah, I do. I really do. I think it's a very good point. I think it would have been, without ISM or without ISO before ISM, it would have been difficult for there to be SIRE or TMSA. They all go together. You can't unbake the cake. These are the ingredients. These are the fundamentals that are needed there. But the commercial pressure is much more impactful on the commercial side of the business. The stakeholder needs from the supply chain have an immediate and high level impact at the high levels of the business decision-making process. Ship owners are often mostly commercial people rather than ship operational people. They understand money much clearer than they understand the complexity of regulations and compliance. They have people that work in the marine or the engineering technical sectors that are expected to meet compliance and look after the ships, and that's as far as it goes for them. What those standards are, they don't really understand and they won't get involved in it. But if they lose a contract or they lose some hire, then they understand that immediately and they understand what the aspects and the outputs of it are. For people like in my roles, we spend a lot of time explaining to commercial people why standards matter, how the impacts might occur, and try to be that broker and that bridge between understanding the risks and the rewards from safety into commerce. And I think it was easy to do it in the tanker business for the last 20 years because everybody understood it. Everybody's grown up with it now, and everybody understands it quite well. In other sectors, there's still a lot of learning going on, and I think we'll start to see more in vetting in the dry bulk sector. And I think there's a lot of people in the dry bulk sector really don't understand vetting. And it's funny that you have some of the conversations with the commercial guys. It's just like going back 20 years to the conversations you had with tanker guys. It's the same discussions. Yeah. But yeah, I think so. Yeah. The commercial, yes. So in summary, yeah, there is a disconnect, and the commercial pressures in the supply chain will have a bigger impact. So I think that's a positive. As companies and bigger organisations go more to ESG, then I think that's a positive impact for the shipping industry.
Good. Thank you.
There was a question, Andrew, just popped up. Michael asks whether 90% is 99% of ship management purely driven by price, or is crew experience, quality, location, country of origin have a bigger impact?
I wouldn't say. Well, I think one of the wonderful and yet crazy things about the shipping industry is that everything's different. You go to every company and they're all different. There's very different philosophies that you'll see. I think the large amount of commercial money that's now in the shipping industry is definitely driven by price. But we look at some of the bigger players in the business, your Maersk, CMA, etc. These MSC, these sort of people are the Greek independents that are operating in dry bulk and tankers, and it's not all price there. They are very effective and they understand their business model very well, and quality is an issue. I've been doing work with Moran Group, an excellent company, and they're in all different sectors. And they're not driven by price at Moran, they're driven by quality. And it's quite clear when you speak to them, they know it very well. As an example, during COVID times, there's restrictions on the big ships, they call it C5, that trade from Australia to China in iron ore. So it's West Australia. There's big restrictions on crew changes in China and big restrictions on crew changes in West Australia. So you couldn't do a crew change there at either end. So people were trying to divert ships. And then there was restrictions on 14 days. You couldn't arrive in Port Hedland if you'd done a crew change within 14 days. So it's extremely difficult to do a crew change and maintain the voyage. So a lot of the Greek independents put the ships off hire for 14 days. So they could do the crew change, plan it all efficiently, look after the crew, and they'd take a hit on the freight. There are other companies that wouldn't take a hit on the freight, and they'd push the crew changes, push them back, try to do everything else. So these price-driven decisions were very visible during the times of COVID and what the outcomes were. So good question, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's 99%. I would say there are significant sectors that it's driven by price, but quality is a really big issue. And I think as these stakeholder pressures come through, quality will continue to be there. But it's the same battle. I think it's the same battle we've had for 100 years or more, but the same discussions.
Yeah.
I have a comment, if I may, Andrew. I was really taken by your comments on STCW and the attempts of STCW to keep pace. And as you probably know, there's a major exercise underway at the moment to revamp the syllabus here in the UK. STCW, no way can it keep up with modern technology. And there was some super evidence of that. Just this week, we were in some of us were in a different webinar with the master of the Sir David Attenborough, describing his voyage to Antarctica. It was as far removed from seafaring as I could possibly imagine. You know, I mean, it's a little relevance to anything I ever knew at sea. And they've got to do all their training on. I mean, there's STCW, of course, but they do all their training specifically on the job. Do you feel that you know, when you ask the question, why do we need all this STCW? Why do we need standards? Why do we need? There's an element of the need to control, and evidenced by that Carnival, that to me, that was Armageddon. I mean, it was just awful. The evidence suggests when people are under a close observation, how it affects their performance is stark. And so we will see drops in performance as a result of the close observation. Why do we need to control? Why can't we let people do stuff that we've trained them for, even if that's in-house, and give them the autonomy and delegate the responsibility to them to let them get on with the job?
Yeah, excellent question. And from our side, I think we'd all take that view. But I think this first started, the first time I came across it was dealing with oil major people when we were doing oil major vetting. And one guy from a very large American oil company said, "In God we trust, everybody else we check." And they're paranoid. They think they've got a lot of skin in the game, and they're risk averse. I think the old models of shipping, or not the traditional model of shipping, was that we'd accept a certain amount of, we'd manage risks, and we'd accept a certain level of risk by managing competence and equipment, and then we'd leave it at that. And those were risks that we thought were acceptable, and we'd insure against them. And that was the model that had been in place for many years. But now with the oil major sort of view, and that is now spreading to other parts of the supply chain, they just don't trust anybody. If you can't show me evidence that this happened, in my view, it didn't happen. And that's what you get. You do, tanker vetting on board ships or in the office. You show me evidence that this was done. Otherwise, I've got no reason to believe you. I'll count it didn't happen. But the supply chain is so effective, and we saw this after the Ever Given, that global supply chain it runs on very tight margins. And the ideas of an old shipping adventure when you set off to go to the east and you might be back in 3 months, or you might not be back at all, would not work in a modern supply chain. The margins for error, delay, damage are very small.
Les asks whether or not the continual shore monitoring of ships' performance isn't putting additional stress on experienced masters and chiefs. Yeah,
I think it's a good question, and I think it's a real point. But the ones I've spoken to, I've not been involved in anywhere that's doing this additional full monitoring, like Carnival or CMA CGM. But when we're getting a lot more data from the ships, I think the ones that I've had dealings with, they're quite happy with it. They like it. They think it's support, and I think it's backup. I do think the point that you made before, it starts to change to that decision-making and responsibility thing. When you've got more than one person that's responsible for something, sometimes you say, who's responsible for it? Several people, nobody's responsible for it. So that's the problem within the entire management function, between how we talk about that, how we discuss it, how we make it clear between ourselves in the office, and how we communicate that to the ships. Because you get different personalities expressed in different ways, and it can cause problems. It's a very good point. Yeah. But I
suppose it depends on how you do it. I mean, you could look at it in a way of, well, that person ashore is essentially part of the team. And if you do it in that kind of way, and they're providing good input rather than just purely being seen as somebody who's monitoring and bollocking or whatever it is.
Exactly. Exactly. So this depends again, and then it raises all these other questions about like retention and the training levels, the competence levels. When you've got a chief engineer that you know well and you know what their standards are, you'll know what to look for, and you know what not to look for, what you don't need to look for. But if you get a new one, then you start to look a lot more. You're testing a lot more, and then so you have to build that sort of relationship. And that's why I think that the crew element is so important. Whereas there's some sectors that are relying more on technology and less on the crew, there will be others that will rely more on the crew and less on technology. And that will again be, we're going back to the further question, that across the whole range of ship management activities and philosophies, there will be different approaches.
Yeah, and I suppose in some ways, like you mentioned the point before, it's no different in a way to the conversations and discussions you had when you started doing tanker vetting, people coming on board and questioning what you do, etc.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything new under the sun, is it? But it's just a lot quicker now. Everything's a lot quicker. It's much more immediate now, and I think that immediacy brings some pressures with it. Before you'd send in your voyage logs and then you get a letter back. It might come in the post even, to say why did this happen and why did that happen. But now it's really immediate. You're seeing changes in fuel consumption or engine temperatures or bearings, and say what's going on? Check this, check that, check this, check that.
I think there's a potential for unintended consequences in all these things, isn't there? And I was working with a young third officer not long ago, and it was a he, and he said that it was common practice now. This is deep sea, clear weather, no traffic. If they saw a light at night, the immediate reaction was to call the master. This is a light at 12 or 14 miles. You call the master. And now that the knee-jerk reaction is to blame the third officer. So why on earth would you do that? Because we wouldn't have done that in our day. We'd have done what we're supposed to do, we're trained to do. But of course, it's a learned behavior, because he sees his master doing precisely the same with every single petty decision. They don't make them on board anymore. They phone the office. They get a decision from the superintendent. So this is now cascading down the ranks. Everybody defers to the next rank up. Nobody takes the responsibility for the decision.
Yeah,
I think that's an unintended consequence.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of an extreme example. I guess those were deep sea ships. because you wouldn't see that on many others.
No, it was a deep sea vessel.
Big ships, that don't see much land. Yeah,
you see a light on the horizon, you call the master.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we see. I've not heard of that, but as you say, it's a learned behaviour, and it's clearly something that's the culture on board that particular ship with that particular master.
Yeah, and of course the juniors see the seniors doing the same thing with their decisions.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, are there any other questions? No. If not, can I thank you on behalf of the Northwest branch of the Nautical Institute, Mark? That was a really interesting talk, and thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you.
A pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen.
Can I put a plug in for our next gig?
Absolutely.
We're meeting at Fleetwood. It's a face-to-face a face-to-face on the 25th of May. That's a Thursday next month. And we're having an exciting day. We're going to be meeting around 3 o'clock for a cup of tea with the cadets. And then at 4 o'clock, we're going to go into the simulator, both engine and deck. And we'll also have delegates in the in the debrief room. So we've got room for about 50 delegates split around amongst the installation. And you'll be observing a maritime casualty. And the maritime casualty will unfold before your eyes. It'll be a pretty disastrous one. It'll involve a ship aground and loss of life and all the rest of it. But that's not the main focus. The main focus is going to be the aftermath, because the focus for the event is casualty management. And following the casualty, we'll be splitting people up into different stations, different perspectives. That's the MCA and MIB's one. Then there'll be one for casualty investigation and salvage. There'll be another one for our insurance PI people. And then Mark's lot will have their own slot. And of course, each of those stations will have different competing perspectives and priorities and all the rest of it. So it's really getting beneath the post-casualty requirements for these various sectors, what it is they'll be looking for, and trying to weave a way through all the flashing blue lights that there are following these things. And then there's still a couple of places we're going to meet informally in the evening for a dinner in Fleetwood. So if anybody's in the Northwest on the 25th of May and wants to participate, please drop me an email and I'll reply as soon as I can.
Thanks, Chris. Good.
Well, that's it.
Okay. Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for joining us as well. And thanks again, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Bye.
Bye now. Bye.